Greetings, one and all. Welcome to the Deep Horror Loft. In this week's twisted tale, a pair of salvagers come face to face with the unknown danger that shaped the entire world. Please like, subscribe and comment if, like me, you believe the abyss is watching us. Deep Horror Loft presents Songs from the Deep. Songs from the Deep. The small watercraft kicked out twin arcs of spray as it cut through the mid-morning air. The sun was 2 or 3 spans above the horizon and rising fast. The temperature, while still chilly, was starting to give way to the heat of the day. There was a small amount of wind and swell, which jostled the craft, causing it to bounce up and down as it flew through the water. A small craft, a salvager, at 20 feet long. It wasn't designed for deep-sea missions. However, its crew of 2 had their objectives. Lox stood at the bow, his green eyes fixed on the horizon. Tall and thin, his black hair was worn long and shaggy and tied back with a strip of whatever cloth he happened to be wearing at the moment. Today, it was a basic leather vest and shorts. His feet were bare, and salt flecked upon his tanned skin as his hands grasped the railing for dear life. "Greaser, any chance of slowing down?" he yelled over the splash of the water and the roar of the motor. "We're going to tip at this rate." "Oh, ye of little faith," came the deep, booming reply. "This tub's older than you. How do you think it got to be that way?" Lox looked over his shoulder, seeing a wide grin on his friend's face. A grin, it seemed, that never left. Greaser was a giant of a man, towering over even Lox, who stood 6 feet tall. Well into his middle years, he possessed a frame of solid muscle that was slowly running to fat. His shaved head glistened in the morning light, and Lox could tell that he had run his razor over it just this morning, an almost religious fixation that just had to be done without fail. That didn't extend to Greaser's beard, however, which hung almost to his chest, and whipped about as the boat continued its surge forward. It did little to hide the grin, though, as the big man waited for the retort that would surely come. "It got to be that way, without muckrabs like yourself pushing it until it falls apart." "Cheeky little minnow, the Mary's been around since before you were a glint of mischief in your daddy's eye, and it'll be here long after your own glints are gone." Lox sighed. The Proud Mary was the boat's name. Greaser claimed he had heard a song about it when drunk in a bar one time, and it stuck. Must have been a hell of a song for that name to stick, he thought ruefully. Still, he had to admit that Greaser poured his heart and soul into the old rust bucket. He worked on it so meticulously that his name, Greaser, had become permanent. Even he claimed he had forgotten his birth name, although that was said with that same stupid grin on his face. Lox was a dab hand at the tools himself. Seemed everyone had to be, since the flotilla's resources were dwindling again. In the couple of centuries since the Big Wash, the huge rising of the world's seas, resources were becoming scarce. No fuel or the like, as people had predicted, but the materials themselves. The massive flotilla, a floating metropolis with old aircraft carriers at its heart, was literally rusting away, and a huge amount of different substances were needed, and with mining operations ceasing over 150 years ago due to the Singers, procuring those resources fell to the salvagers like the Proud Mary. While Greaser kept the boat going straight and running, Lox's expertise was different altogether. He was a bell ringer, and he had just seen something on the horizon. Lox called to his friend, "Spy sign, Grease, slow down." For once, Greaser's smile faded. He eased back on the throttle, and the Proud Mary responded smoothly. The hulking man stepped up beside Lox, squinting into the rising sun, which now silhouetted a series of tall, thin, metal structures emerging from the ocean, reaching up into the sky a few miles away. There were 5 or 6 of them, with differing heights, and a few were broken, leaning or hanging by a few rusting metal girders. As they idled towards the structures, Lox turned to Greaser. "What's the edict today?" The large man reached behind him and grabbed a small piece of paper. It was a wonder that in this watery world, paper had once again surpassed electronics as the preferred method of correspondence, a permanent transition that had occurred when Greaser was still in school. As he put it, nothing is truly waterproof, especially all those wires. Copper, plastic, and rubber, Greaser said, stroking his beard. Lots of rubber. Lox shook his head. Any copper down there not ruined will have been stripped clean by now. Those muck crabs had no business assigning us this sector. Greaser shrugged. Might still be plastic or rubber, and you know some of the flotilla main seals are on the verge of splitting. At this, Lox raised an eyebrow. If that were true, then rubber would soon become very valuable. The Mary slowed even more as the structures rose up in front of them. The swell did not move them, but groaning metallic creaks issued from them. The water around them was murky, a perpetual cloudiness brought on by what lay beneath. Lox strained his memory, trying to remember which city this had been once, but it escaped him. It didn't matter anyway. No one down there but the fish and the singers now, and, hopefully, their payday. Who did this sector last? Lox asked. Sometimes you could tell a haul from who had already covered the area. Greaser's face fell slightly. The Thunderdome. Lox jerked slightly and turned back to the railing. They were beneath one of the metal spires now, its shadow thrown across them like a reminder of a bygone age. The Thunderdome belonged to Greaser's oldest friend, a loud, skinny fellow named Oren. They had been in the same bar when they came up with their ship's names, although Lox could never see the connection. No, Oren and Greaser were childhood friends, and enlisted in the salvage game together, and Oren and his crew were currently missing, during a mission to this sector. Singers? Lox asked. Greaser shrugged, a minute movement of his massive shoulders. That's what the report says. Lox cursed. Singers. It was amazing what weird nicknames people came up with, even for things that were now responsible for the disappearances and, let's face it, deaths of hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of people. It was a nickname that had started as a joke, but the real world had pressed back, and now the word singer inspired anything but. All bell ringers had to know the story. They had to know why they did what they did. It seemed everyone knew anyway. 50 years after the Big Wash, salvage was a booming industry. Technology was still all the rage then, and massive electronic operations brought up sunken riches by the acre. The salvage operations had been ramping up, and back then, everybody wanted a piece. Then, people started going missing. Divers, whose only responsibility was to supervise the massive machines, vanished without a trace. No response given to hailing attempts. No equipment left behind. No blood. No bodies. Nothing. Just increasingly worried co-workers and family members. It started as a few people here and there, always in the water. Then it ramped up. Hundreds. Then thousands. All humans in the water. Divers. Submersible pilots. They all vanished. The salvage industry slowly, but inevitably, ground to a halt. This wasn't a random occurrence that could be explained away. This was unavoidable. 100% of the salvagers who entered the water never returned, and the only clue anyone had to go by was the sounds. Those above water, working on the vessels, all reported similar things. A sound of sorts. Not loud or comprehensible, but something on the edge of the senses, like the drone of a mosquito that you know is in the room, but can never find. Except there wasn't a drone. It was regular, almost rhythmic, almost like a song. The confused words from thousands of mouths that had seen their co-workers, friends, families vanish without a trace. And so, the singer's term was born, a nickname for the greatest unknown horror to plague mankind after the Big Wash that had reshaped the world, with the threat of the singers, whose unheard songs overrode every attempt to bypass them. Salvage was a dead industry. Mankind almost died out, if it weren't for a few stupid teenagers. Filled with the brashness and folly of youth, they invoked the oldest of oaths, a dare, and went swimming. The idiots went swimming. And yet, by the time their frightened parents and incredulous authorities got wind of their absence, they had returned. Alive. Whole. unscathed. Needless to say, the interrogations those teens were subjected to dwarfed all others before or since, and only one piece of information seemed to hold any merit. The teens had been blasting music while they swam. Music from a speaker that had been knocked into the water. And so the tests began. Without delving too much into the specifics, many people were lost before a breakthrough occurred. It seemed that the singers, the still unknown danger, could be stopped if a regular beat-based sound were broadcast within a certain range of people in the water. For the first time in years, people started surfacing, returning home. The flotillas rejoiced. They were saved. Of course, it wasn't perfect, not at first, but as we humans do, we refine the ideas, although the human cost of these ideas is something best not thought about. However, the first fully singer-proof system was devised. At its core, the bells and bell ringers. Bell ringers like locks. As a salvage ship entered their assigned sector, they deployed a bell, a standalone self-powered transmitter. It broadcasted a repetitive, pulsing sound signal to any receiver within range. Those receivers were in the form of full-body diving suits, complete with air tanks and communication systems, the remnants of technology that used to run the world. Those who wore the suits were the bell ringers. They trusted the bells to keep them safe as they combed the depths for the salvage the flotillas desperately required. Bells and suits weren't cheap. Locks and Greaser were lucky in that they had connections, family in the salvage industry, and they had done well. Well enough, anyway. Recently, salvage had been slow, owing to a combination of sparse sectors and unfair assignments. Locks began his preliminary checks on the bell. Half the size of a man, the egg-shaped bell was ringed with floats and a long line that tethered it to the salvager. He was about to roll it down its specially made ramp into the sea when Greaser's voice cut through the salty air. "Hold up, I just got a ping. There's another salvager here." Locks whirled about. Another vessel? Impossible. Each sector was assigned to one team for the salvage period. More than one could lead to fines, arrests, and brig time, not to mention any conflicts between the crews themselves. "Pirates?" he asked. Greaser appeared, one eyebrow cocked. "Don't think so. Vessel isn't transmitting. No bell or radio signal." He hiked a thick finger over his shoulder. "Click and a half that way." "What do you think?" Locks asked, fingering the bell's controls. Greaser shrugged. "We're assigned this sector. If the vessel is abandoned, we have rights." He left the obvious unspoken. The last vessel registered in the sector belonged to his friend, or had belonged to him. Locks clapped the burly man's shoulders. "Let's check it out." His companion's eyes crinkled slightly with a smile, and he nodded. Half an hour later, the Proud Mary idled to adrift under the shadow of a massive sunken structure. In the relative darkness of that shadow, a lone salvager floated. No lights, no engine, no visible damage, just the vessel, bobbing eerily on the blue sea. As they got closer, Locke sighed, seeing the name painted in scrawling yellow letters across the hull, complete with a crudely drawn lightning bolt. The Thunderdome. Greaser attempted to hail his friend's ship, but no answer. He resorted to yelling across the sea between them, using all manner of colourful language to entice a reaction from Oren or his crew. The only response was the lapping of the small waves against the bow. "Nobody home," Locke stated curiously. "Not even crew." Even if the singers had claimed Oren, the bell ringer of the Thunderdome, the crew should have raised an alarm. The bell ringer was usually the only one to enter the water after all. Whatever the singers were, or did, they never affected those above the surface. So where were the rest of them? Greaser eased the Proud Mary up alongside the other vessel. While Locks tied off, the big man vaulted over the railing, landing with a thud upon the deck of the Thunderdome. He wasted no time, vanishing inside the cabin before Locks had a chance to react. Seconds ticked past, turning into minutes. Locks began to feel uneasy. Just when he was about to board the boat himself, Greaser appeared, shaking his head. "Nothing. No signs of piracy or mechanical faults. No crew. Nothing seems wrong. It's like they just vanished," Locks finished. As Greaser moved from place to place, looking for any evidence as to the Thunderdome's crew's fate, he cocked his head. "Hey, where's the bell?" Greaser looked around. The Thunderdome's bell was not on board, but there was no sign of it in the surrounding waters. No line either. Broken off? A gust of wind played across Lox's face. His eyes narrowed. Hey, the wind picked up. Why aren't we drifting? True enough, the two salvagers were not moving along. They stayed in the shadow of the rusting skyscraper. Greaser strode to the bow and checked the anchor. Still up. What the krebs going on? It was then that Lox spied the line. Tied off from the Thunderdome stern, it was the corded, thick cable that was rated to hold a vessel's bell. But it wasn't drifting. It was rigid, disappearing at an angle off the stern, vanishing into the depths towards the underwater structure. Oh man, the bell must have gotten jammed in the scraper. Greaser spat over the side. No way to cut the cable. Brass wouldn't want to part with one of their precious bells, which means they'd have to try and free it, Lox finished, a cold chill running up his spine despite the morning heat, which also means that the others would have had to get wet. Greaser cursed. But Oren always stocked extra bell suits. They shouldn't have... He stopped himself, realizing what Lox had already. Bell suits or not, if the bell was damaged, then they were goners. Crib, Greaser said softly, clenching his massive fists. He stared at the azure blue depths for a moment, then set his jaw and met Lox's eyes. We need to get down there. Lox raised his hands. Whoa. We? Greaser nodded. He was my mate, Lox. He has a family. They deserve to know what happened. We know what happened, Grease, the bell ringer replied tersely. I'm coming, Greaser stated flatly, taking a step towards Lox, fists still clenched. His eyes were hard, though tears welled in them. Lox sighed and raised his own hands in defeat. Fine. Suit up. The hulking man nodded once, some familiar affection creeping into that flat stare. Thanks, kid. Once we see what's what, I'll help with salvaging whatever's down there, half the time with 2 hands. Then we can get the crab out of here. Lox smiled his assent, but it was half-hearted. A knot had formed in the pit of his stomach, and he thought he heard something, a low hum, just out of the range of his senses. He shook his head, the knot in his stomach redoubling as the 2 men returned to the Mary. Lox resumed his checks on the bell, and had almost finished sinking his bell suit when Greaser stepped into view. Lox's eyes widened at the sight of the mechanic. He was suited up in black from head to toe, with a padded, knobbed and hinged bell suit stretched over his ample frame. However, where Lox's suit was grey in colour and was a standard Mark III, Greaser's was jet black, sleeker to look at, and had more detailed electrical conduits and interfaces built into it. The suit's helmet, carried under one muscular arm, was angular and offered a greater field of vision in the visor than Lox's own rounded one. A Mark IV? Where in the depths did you get that? I know a guy, Greaser waved a hand dismissively. Got a good deal, pre-release. There's a reason they haven't been released yet, Greaser, Lox retorted, his gestures becoming irritated. The tests aren't complete yet. 100% success rate in simulated conditions, Greaser quoted, jamming a thumb against his own chest. No sink drop-off, longer range, longer in the wet. Yeah, sync to the new Mark IV bells, Lox practically shouted in disbelief. The Mark IV can sync with any previous model bell. Its power rating is twice that of the older models. It won't be a problem. Lox almost gave up then and there. Bell ringers survived by knowing their equipment, by extensive testing. To bring an unknown suit on a dive went against everything he'd been taught. Greaser, sensing his companion's rising temper, raised a placating hand. Kid, let me sync to the bell. If there are any problems, I won't go. Fair? Lox gritted his teeth. Fine, fair. But any problems? You stay topside. Got it? Predictably, there were none. The Mark IV suit synced perfectly with the bell, regardless of the older model. In fact, it synced faster than Lox's suit. Greaser's sudden grin made Lox want to punch him. However, the knowledge of what they were entering the water for stayed his hand. He knew Greaser just wanted to investigate exactly what had happened to the Thunderdome. Activating bell music. Locks thumbed a switch on the bell, and immediately a loud, reverberating thud echoed through his entire body. He shook slightly, even years of familiarity unable to dispel the sheer unnaturalness of the pulse. He pulled a lever, and the bell's catches released, sending it into the ocean with a splash, where it quickly floated away from the salvager, stopping only when the 20-foot line setting was reached. Locks glanced over at Greaser, whose face was a picture of nausea through his visor. He wasn't as used to the pulsing, and he was paying for it. Still, he looked at Locks and nodded. "Let's do it." His voice sounded shaky over the comm. Locks did not respond. Instead, he stepped up to the launch pad, where the bell had been released. He exhaled, loosening his body, and stepped forward into the waiting sea. The cold, crisp water enveloped him, the bubbles clearing almost immediately. He kicked, his thin feet propelling him away from the proud Mary as he heard the impact behind him as Greaser hit the water. Locks looked around. Despite the relatively choppy surface, under it was calm blue water. It was cloudy, as all waters near the ruined structures of the past were. It seemed that even hundreds of years later, humans couldn't help but dirty the world around them. The bell's pulses continued, rattling Locks's teeth, but he ignored them. He gestured to Greaser, and the pair swam under the barnacled hulls of the salvagers, locating the bell line of the Thunderdome, and beginning to follow it into the water. As he moved deeper, visibility became worse and worse, until even the sunlight seemed to leach out of the water around them. Greaser followed, flicking on his suit lights, so that they would illuminate anything in front of Locks without blinding him. Locks noticed, with some irritation, that Greaser's lights were brighter than his own. They kept following the line. Locks jerked slightly as the massive, rusting metal of the long-dead superstructure appeared out of the cloudy water. He paused, mentally scanning the area for possible salvage points. He was here for that, after all. Something nagged at him, but he brushed it away, focusing on the tasks at hand. The line kept dipping downwards, and they followed. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic pulse of the bell. "What the—" Locks uttered the first words in well over 5 minutes as he suddenly emerged into clear water. Greaser bumped into him as Locks snapped on his own lights. The beams played off the metal scrap skyscrapers around them, seeing them in perfect detail hundreds of feet away. This shouldn't be happening, Locks's brain thought. Water was always cloudy around the sunken cities, especially in this sector, where the metallic decay was extreme. Now he beheld the great metal tombstones marking a bygone age, and the knot in his stomach swelled tight. The bell pulses continued, but now they seemed to be competing with something. Something close? "Here," Greaser's voice ripped through his thoughts. Locks whirled, seeing his friend had followed the line to its end, amidst a tangle of rusted steel girders. In that tangle sat the Thunderdome's bell, jammed between multiple beams, one of which had bent so far it had snapped, its ruined end buried in the bell's midsection. "There's our answer." Locks's voice was a whisper. The bell must have collided with the rusted building and tangled, pulling until this had happened, breaking it beyond repair. Locks shuddered. The bell had been broken on release, forcing the crew to try and retrieve it to get free. Locks saw Greaser's head hang within his visor. He knew it too. Oren never had a chance. Locks put a hand on his friend's shoulder, not knowing what to say. Their own bell's pulse shattered their grief. Locks looked around and shivered once again. The new, crystal-clear visibility at this depth unnerved him. Something isn't right, he thought, staring past the ruined structures, into the fathomless waters beyond, towards the strange thoughts that began to manifest at the back of his head. "Locks! Locks!" Greaser's voice startled him. He turned back, flashing a thumbs up at his friend. Greaser returned the sign, and his deep voice sounded over the pulsing. "We've seen what we needed to. Let's get to work." "All right," Locks replied, activating sensors. The suit's sensor on his wrist fired up. pinging softly as it began to search. He moved past Greaser towards the tangled pile of steel that held the damaged bell, ready to analyze. Their own bell pulsed rhythmically from above, offering the comfort of security. Lox heard Greaser activate his own sensor, which pinged once. Then, a horrible burst of static shot through his earpiece. He yelled in pain and doubled over, futilely attempting to clap his hands over his ears, succumbing to instinct, even this far underwater. The static cut off, leaving silence. Lox looked back, seeing Greaser, similarly affected, hanging silently in the water. Silently. Lox's spine heaved as a wave of chills ran up it. Silence. The regular pulses were gone. Their bell had stopped. Mark IV sensors. It came to Lox in a flurry of horrible understanding. Mark IV suits could sync with older models, but had more power. When Greaser had activated his sensors, he had overloaded the bell, which was synced to him in turn. Overloaded, and crashed it. A small, droning sound sparked into being at the periphery of Lox's hearing. His stomach was no longer knotted. It had sunk to the pits. Uncontrollable shuddering broke out across his limbs as the full, sinister weight of what was happening settled upon him. He could only croak a single word. Surface. Both Lox and Greaser immediately started thrashing, kicking their fins for all it was worth. Technique was gone, replaced by dread and panic. The droning hum that migrated from the edge of his senses slowly became more audible. The buzzing in his ears echoed the thumping of his heart. Lox didn't slow. He kept powering on, seeing the cloudy water layer a short ways above him, his fear-addled mind foolishly seeing it as a finish line, a barrier that could be crossed to safety. Lox opened his mouth to shout to Greaser, to tell him they'd almost made it, but he suddenly became aware that he was alone in the water. As the droning hum continued its slow creep to the front of his skull, he risked a look back. His eyes widened. Greaser was swimming, but not towards the surface. Rather, he was spiraling downwards, heading languidly towards the crystal-clear depths. His strokes were smooth and controlled, a direct contrast to the ragged breathing Lox heard coming from the comms. A strangled voice sounded, rasping something that could have been a help. Greaser stopped swimming, 70 feet below Lox and 20 feet above the silty bottom, close to the colossal rusted base of the building. The big man floated there, unmoving, except to stay upright. On the comms, Lox heard what he thought was weeping. Then they emerged from the bowels of the ruined structure. A horrific gurgle sounded on the comms, and Lox bit back his own scream of terror. There were many, easily 10 or more. They were dull white, with long, serpentine, undulating bodies that tapered to an eel's ridged tail. However, the length of their bodies were covered in row upon row of thrashing, skittering legs, jointed and insectile, and kicking in waves, propelling them slowly forward. There was not beauty to their movements. They were ungainly, skittering, spider-like, edging slowly forward with no visible evidence of possible additional speed. There was nothing graceful or natural about them. They were just wrong, as if their very existence was an affront to the world itself. As they left the ocean floor, twisting their way up towards the still form of Greaser, Lox saw their undersides, and he almost vomited into his visor. The droning hum was insistent now. They had another, smaller set of legs, razor-sharp, almost fangs, that twisted and twitched along the entire length of their bodies. They quivered and snatched at the water, endlessly anticipating their next meal. 2 spindly, finned limbs emerged from the top third, waving spasmodically in the water, tipped with sharp ridges. However, it was the heads at the tip of those bodies that chilled Lox's blood, eerily human-like, swept back with a soft brow and milky, staring eyes. And those eyes were fixed upon Greaser. The droning hum pounded in Lox's temples as he beheld the nightmarish monstrosities close in on the floating form of his friend. There was no strike, no visible change in the monster's demeanour. One moment they were skittering towards Greaser, the next they had him. swarming boorishly over him, turning him this way and that, clamping their jointed legs and spindly fins on him. He did not scream or move, or resist in any way. There was only the ragged, sobbing gasp that ripped over the comms, penetrating Lox's head like a blade of anguish. A grey, inky substance issued from one creature's finned arms, then another's, and another's. The deft manipulation of Grease's limp but still moving body slowed, as the substance was smeared all over him. It hardened quickly, cocooning the human's body in an unyielding, biological coffin. A single arm protruded from the grey mess. Lox thought he saw fingers twitching. Two of them grasped the ends of the bundle and began hauling it down towards the cavernous opening of the rusted skyscraper. The rest of the creatures turned towards him, gazing up at him with cloudy, sinister eyes. The droning hum was almost unbearable. Lox shut his mind to the weak, sobbing sounds over the comm, and screamed internally as the monstrosities began their slow, laborious journey towards him. "I'm sorry," Lox pleaded, as he shut off the comm and began to swim towards the monsters. Lox's heart seized, his eyes widening as he kicked his fins lazily, his arms pulling the surface as he moved deeper towards the oncoming creatures. Lox's mind railed and screamed, trying incessantly to reach his limbs and body, but he continued his slow descent. He tried everything, moving his arms, his legs, even the lids of his eyes. He only succeeded in minor twitches. His body was no longer his own. The droning hum was everywhere now. Singers. The thought came unbidden as he realized too late the drone's purpose. It had been there all along. It had nestled in his mind, waiting to strike the moment the bell stopped. It had taken his body and made him come to them. These monsters, who could not move fast enough to catch, who instead used their song to draw prey to them, like the sirens of old, only much more horrifying. These monsters who had taken countless, fathomless numbers of people over the years, who had claimed legions with their song. A strangled sob escaped Lox's lips as his body stopped swimming, floating loosely in the water. They were in front of him now, edging closer, reaching out to him, droning their song, and their milky, soulless eyes stared into his, reaching to claim him like all the others. A burst of static cut through the drone like a knife. The monsters screeched an unholy, inhuman sound and twisted upon themselves, thrashing wildly in the water. A pulsing beat sounded, and again. It washed over Lox, rattling his teeth. He raised a hand to his head, futilely trying to block an ear. Raised a hand. Clarity flooded Lox's fractured mind. The bell was working again. It must have rebooted and resynced. He stole a look down. The nightmarish creatures were in full panic mode now, undulating and thrashing towards their lair, dragging the still twitching Grease's cocoon with them. Lox wasted no time. He turned and swam for his life, his fins whipping the water as he exploded up into the layer of cloudiness above. He said a quick prayer for Greaser as he went. Guilt gnawed at him, but it paled in comparison to the sheer panic and want to survive. Lox clawed his way to the surface, the screeches of the singers still audible over the bell's pulses. He did not stop until he reached the surface, thrashing to the Proud Mary and yanking himself up onto its deck. He still did not stop. Without stripping his suit, without even retrieving the bell, he fired up the engines, cut the lines from the Thunderdome, and powered away from the sector as fast as the Mary could go, trailing the skipping, pulsing bell behind him. It was a full half an hour later that reason finally won out over insanity, and Lox slowed the salvager. It was a miracle that the bell line had not fouled the prop, and he retrieved it carefully. He did all the checks and stripped off his suit, ensuring it was working, maintained, cleaned, and stored. The bell and suit held more importance for him now than they ever had, now that he knew what was down there. Then, and only then, did the full weight of what had occurred hit him. Lox collapsed on the deck, sobbing uncontrollably, and dry heaving as waves of panic and guilt showered him. He moved his fingers, remembering the feeling of being a prisoner in his own body, and how close he had become to being yet another meaningless footnote in the flotilla's history. But now he knew the terrible secret. He knew what waited down there in the depths of the ruined world. He knew of the monsters that crawled through the deep. He could hear them, that droning hum on the edge of his senses. Their song was always there, and it would haunt him forever.